Welcome to Kollecting Kaos, Talking Points. What you're looking at is a Randy Bowen Superman statue from the 90s. Now, I can get my notes in order so I don't forget what I want. Should have done that before I started the video, right? While I'm going through the talking points, I'm just going to show you some random comics. Towards the end, I will be a little more focused on showing you one particular comic. But most of these are random. Most of them aren't in my lights yet. But I just want to have something for you to look at besides Superman while I'm talking. Now, in 1948, the minimum wage was 40 cents an hour, and comics were 10 cents. So if you had no other bills, you could purchase 4 comics for 1 hour's work. In 1972, just 24 years later, and by the way, the year I graduated from high school, the minimum wage was $1.60, and comics averaged about 20 cents. Again, if you had no other bills, you could get about 8 comics for 1 hour's work. Oh, the prices and the labels you see on them are on plastic. They are not on the comic. In 1995, another 24 years has passed, and the minimum wage was $4.25 an hour. You can buy about 2 comics for an hour's work because the price was, right around $2 a piece. I better take those down. In fact, let's move Superman over and use my usual stands, because that might be a little better. Let's come back all the way back to 2019. Now the minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, with the average price of a comic being between $4 and $5. About 1 comic for an hour's work. I think it's kind of sad. The best time for collecting new comics was in the early years of the Bronze Age. Now, over the last 50 years that I have been actively, and sometimes not so actively, collecting comics, I've graded a lot of comics. In fact, I've graded more comics than I care to try to count. Yeah, it's that many. You got to remember, there was a period of time there that I owned a store, which is where a lot of these labels come from. But, I've graded enough that I feel that I'm reasonably competent at it. Now, I've also repaired a number of comics over the years. Not quite as many as I've graded, but I've quite a few. As years have gone by, I've slowly started using better and better materials. And one day I'll do a video with those and show you some of those materials, or all of them even. Maybe I'll even just get out my box of my repair kit and show you everything I keep in it. And in general, I'm not going to do that today, of course. Now, let's get out the grading guide, the Overstreet grading guide, and read exactly what it says a repair is, just so you know where I'm coming from. Comic book repair: when a tear, loose staple, or centerfold has been mended without changing or adding to the original finish of the book. Repair may involve tape, glue, or nylon gossamer, and is easily detected. It is considered a defect. Notice that it says it's considered a defect, but then if you think about it, what you are trying to correct or what you're trying to repair is also a defect. So it's a trade-off. Do you repair it in order to keep it from getting worse? Make it last longer? Or do you leave it like it is? Maybe it'll maybe have problems in the future with it. It doesn't really matter. I'm not really bothered by repairs. Of course, it depends on how it was done. And normally the comics that I do repair, I have every intention of keeping them in my collection. So I'll always make notes for any repairs that I do and keep it with the comic on the off chance that I may decide at some point to sell that comic. I want to be open with people. I want them to know something was done. Which brings me to my next talking point, which is restoration. Restoration in general doesn't bother me either. Of course, that's to the extent that it can also be done with the intent to preserve a comic for future generations. Unfortunately, restoration is often done nowadays to books that probably don't really need it. All in chasing that higher grade. Oh my God, that all-elusive 9.8. I'm, of course, talking about spinal removal, cleaning, and pressing. Generally, if someone is removing a spine, though, it probably needs it. But the current belief seems to be that cleaning and pressing a comic isn't restoration. Now, I don't know why that is, because to my mind, it absolutely is restoration. But let's go back to Overstreet again and read what it says about comic book restoration. It's kind of a cool cover. Comic book restoration. Any attempt, whether professional or amateur, to enhance the appearance of a comic book. These procedures may include any or all of the following techniques: recoloring, adding missing paper, stain, ink, dirt, or tape removal, whitening, pressing out wrinkles, staple replacement, trimming, reglossing, etc. Note, unprofessional work can lower the value of a book. Wait a minute. Let me read some of that again. Any attempt, whether professional or amateur, to enhance the appearance of a comic book. These procedures may include stain, ink, dirt, or tape removal. Dirt removal. Isn't that kind of like cleaning? Pressing out wrinkles. Those two are specifically stated. Cleaning and pressing is restoration. Let's put that to rest. I'll never discuss it again on this channel. I don't think I need to. Now, don't get me wrong. I clean a lot of comics. It's just something I do. I mean, if I get a comic and I think it'll look better if it's a little bit cleaner. I'll do that, you know, because I'm generally planning on keeping in my collection anyway. So what's wrong with making it look a little better? And spine roll removal. God, I hate spine rolls. Now, if they're mild, if it's just a mild spine roll, generally don't worry a whole lot about it. It's just one of those things, you know. But if it's a severe spine roll, I'll absolutely fix it, because a bad spine roll can cause the staples to loosen, and eventually the centerfold or the cover could come off. Centerfold come out. Well, so I consider it a form of conservation, but I also recognize that it is in fact restoration. For both of them, and I always will document cleaning and roll removal, spine roll removal, on a comic book that I have done. As you can see, there are a lot of Action Comics. I put a bunch of them in my lights today. But, you know, I have a pretty good sized run of Action Comics, so I guess that's understandable. Now, pressing, on the other hand, I have the equipment. I have the knowledge. And I have the experience of how to do a pressing. In general, though, I choose not to. And I rarely will press a comic. I mean, a comic has to really need it bad for me to press it. And the reason for that is I'm not concerned with 1 or 2 points on a grade. I'm not concerned whether a comic is mint or near mint. I'm not concerned if it's very fine to near mint, or even very fine. You know, those are all really acceptable grades for me. And on the lower grade comics, it doesn't matter. A grade and a half just isn't going to make that much difference. And since I don't send my comics to be professional graded, it's just not something that bothers me. What does bother me is the fact that grading companies don't consider pressing or cleaning restoration, and they actually offer it as a service. That bothers me. Now, I understand that the grading companies are in business to make money. I don't have a problem with that. I also understand that on some of the older, more valuable comics, they have an additional charge, some of them do, based on the value of the comic. So if they press it and clean it and it gets a higher grade, they get to charge you more money. They're in business to make money. For them, that's a good thing. For the hobby as a whole, I don't necessarily think it is. And I don't think a new comic that's brand new, that you just bought, that came out yesterday, should be pressed. Let nature do it. If a year or 2 years later it still looks nasty and needs to be pressed, then do it. Don't do it when it first comes out. I just don't think that's very good. But again, it's not up to me. It's up to the owner of the comic, and they should do what they think is best. Now, I don't use grading services because for me, it's just, I enjoy comics. I like to look at them. I like the feel of them. I like the smell of them. And I like to read them. And comics that you have encapsulated, you can't feel them, you can't read them, you can't smell them. Now, I've had people tell me, well, you know, if you ever had an encapsulated, if you ever had a graded comic, you'd feel differently. Would I? Would owning a graded comic make any difference to me whatsoever as to how I feel about comics? I'm going to have to hold this because it won't stay up. As you can see, this is my one graded comic. I can't smell it. I can't touch it. I can't read it unless I take it out of the slab. And I don't really want to do that because it's actually, I would have graded this about an 8.5. It is not a 9.6 in my opinion. There's no way I would have graded it an 8.5. It has two, to me, glaring defects on the back, upper, and lower spine. It has 1/4-inch tears on the upper and lower spine. I guess they considered them bindery defects and therefore don't count. They count to me. It's a defect. So, yeah, I own a graded comic. I may get other ones in the future, but as of right now, that's the only one I own. And I still feel the same way. So, that argument doesn't hold water for me. If you like your comics graded, that's great. It's still a comic book. I still think you're wonderful for collecting them. Just not my bag, okay? My last talking point has to do with lists. Now, if you collect key issues only, it probably isn't that important. I, on the other hand, collect runs and sets, and it is absolutely imperative that I know what I need for a run rather than try to remember if I have something. Let's take this comic, for example. I bought this back in the 90s when I wasn't keeping lists. Came out while I was in the armed forces, and I didn't buy it off the rack. I did eventually make a list, and this comic was on it, so I bought it. That's how I got this one. The list is left at home, you know, because you have a list, you leave it at home, right? And couldn't remember if I had it. So, of course, I bought another copy. It's a nice cover. You know, have a couple of copies of a nice cover. That's no problem, right? And later on, I bought it again because, again, I couldn't remember. Took my list to a show, and this was one of the comics on my list. So, of course, I bought it. And then didn't bother updating my list. Was at a comic shop with my list, and I bought it. You kind of see where this is going, don't you? I went to a show, and I saw it. I picked it up. I looked. It's on my list. I must need it. Must not have it. Put it there, and the guy looked at me and went, "You've got that already, don't you?" I went, "It's on my list." And he went, "Yeah, but you bought one from me a couple of months ago at a show." I went, "No, it's on my list, so I must not have got it." He said, "Let me see your list." I showed it to him. He says, "You know, you don't have anything marked off here?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "How old is this list?" I said, "I don't know, I made it 6-8 months ago." He said, "And you haven't bought any comics since then?" I said, "Yeah, I bought a lot." He said, "But you don't have any marked off. What good is a list if you don't mark off the comics you buy?" And I went, "Yeah, I guess you have a point." I said, "But I better get this because it's on my list." And he went, "No, I'm not going to sell it to you." And I said, "What do you mean you're not going to sell it to me?" "Of course you're going to sell it to me." He said, "I'm going to hold it at this price." And it was only like $1, you know, so it wasn't that big a deal. He said, "But I'm going to hold it at this price. And the next show, update your list. At the next show, if you still need it, it's still on your list, I'll sell it to you." He said, "But I'm 99% sure you have it." So I went home, and of course, sure enough, I had it. So I didn't buy it from him. But my whole point is, make a list if you keep runs. Make a list and update it so that you don't end up like me and have a few too many of a comic, even though you like the cover. I just don't want this to happen to you. Make a list and keep it up to date. It's important. That's it for this episode of Talking Points. It went a little longer than I had originally expected. I get kind of sidetracked on certain key issues, key points that bother me a lot. Keep collecting graded comics if that's your bag. Keep sending them in if you like it. It's still a collection. It's still comic books. It's still great. You can read them if you want to take them out of the slab. There are other options online to read the comics. No reason not to. Keep your lists up to date. Think twice about restoration or repairing a comic. Think twice about pressing that comic just to get a higher grade. Is it really that important? Yeah, each person has to make up their mind. If they think it's really important, then it is. Add your comments below. I always like reading what you have to say. I will respond. If you have a negative comment, that's cool too. I want to read those as well. Just don't use any foul language, because who knows? Maybe a kid will start watching the channel, and I want to be child friendly as well as adult friendly. I want all types of collectors. And I'll talk to you next video. Bye.